This is one of the hardest things I've ever had to put into words, but I need to get it out. My name's Jake, and I'm a soldier who just got back from my second deployment to Afghanistan. I thought I'd seen the worst humanity had to offer while out there, but nothing prepared me for what I walked into at home. I've been married to Sarah for 6 years. We met when I was stationed in Texas, and she was working as a nurse. She was my rock, at least, that's what I thought. She kept me grounded when the days were long, and I didn't know if I'd make it back in one piece. I wrote to her whenever I could, sometimes even when the danger outside made it almost impossible to focus. I believed in us. Fast forward to about a week ago. I had just gotten home after 10 months overseas. Sarah was at work, and I thought I'd surprise her. I'd spent hours in airports dreaming of this moment, imagining her running into my arms like she always had before. I went to grab some food from the fridge and found a small stack of mail on the counter. One of them was a bill addressed to a name I didn't recognize. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. It was a receipt for a romantic weekend getaway. A hotel, a spa package, and a dinner for two. The dates lined up perfectly with when Sarah had claimed she'd been working extra shifts. My heart sank, but I tried to convince myself it was a mistake. Maybe it was for her friend or something. When she came home, I couldn't hold back. I asked her outright if she'd been seeing someone. Her face said it all before she even opened her mouth. She stammered and tried to turn it around on me, saying I was paranoid, and that I didn't trust her. But when I showed her the receipt, her defenses crumbled. She admitted it. She'd been seeing some guy named Mark, a coworker from the hospital. She said it started a few months after I deployed. Apparently, she was lonely and didn't know how to deal with it. Her voice cracked as she tried to explain, but all I could hear was white noise. The betrayal felt like a knife to the chest. Here I was, risking my life in a war zone, while the person I trusted the most was betraying me in ways I couldn't even imagine. The worst part? She didn't even seem sorry. She said she was confused about what she wanted. I left the house that night and haven't been back since. I'm staying at a buddy's place while I try to sort through my emotions and figure out what comes next. I'm angry, hurt, humiliated, all of it. But more than that, I feel like I've lost everything that mattered to me. I gave Sarah my whole heart, and now it feels like there's nothing left. I don't know what I'll do from here, but one thing's for sure, I'm not going to let this define me. I've been through hell before, and I'll get through this too. Thanks to everyone who reached out after my first post. It means a lot. I wasn't sure if I'd share more, but honestly, it's helping to get this all out. Writing it down makes it feel real, and it's giving me some clarity. So, here's what happened after I walked out of my own house. The night I found out about Sarah's affair, I didn't go far, just to a buddy's place nearby. His name's Ethan, one of the few friends who stuck by me after I joined the army. I showed up at his door with no warning, and he took one look at me and knew something was wrong. Ethan's been through his own share of heartbreak, so I guess he saw the look in my eyes. I told him everything. At first, I couldn't even get the words out. I was choking on my own anger. But once I started, it all came pouring out. The hotel receipt, her confession, the way she acted like she didn't even care that she was tearing me apart. Ethan just listened, letting me vent until I was too exhausted to keep going. "Jake, you don't deserve this," he said. "You've been out there putting your life on the line, and she's here playing house with some other guy? That's unforgivable." His words felt like a lifeline, reminding me that I wasn't crazy for feeling how I did. For a few minutes, I even let myself believe he was right. The next day, Sarah called. I stared at my phone for a while, debating whether to answer. Eventually, I picked up, mostly because I wanted answers. "I want to talk," she said. Her voice was shaky, like she was scared of what I'd say. "You mean you want to explain why you decided to ruin our marriage?" I shot back. "I didn't mean for it to happen, Jake," she started. "I was lonely. You were gone, and I didn't know how to handle it." Her excuses felt like gasoline on a fire. "You didn't know how to handle it? So your solution was to hop into bed with Mark." There was silence on her end. Then she tried to turn it around, saying, "You were so focused on the army, Jake. You don't know what it's like to feel abandoned in your own home." That hit a nerve. I'd sacrificed everything to provide for us, to give her a stable life, and now she was acting like I'd failed her. "Don't you dare try to make this my fault," I said. "I was out there risking my life while you were having an affair. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" She started crying, and for a moment I felt nothing. Just empty. Her tears didn't move me like they used to. It was like I didn't know her anymore. "I don't want to lose you," she finally said. "Please, Jake, we can fix this." But could we? I didn't answer her. I just hung up. After that, I started to feel this overwhelming need to do something, anything, to take control of my life again. Sitting around feeling sorry for myself wasn't going to fix anything. So I went to the gym, hoping to burn off some of the anger. But no matter how hard I pushed myself, it wasn't enough. That night, Ethan suggested we grab a drink at a bar nearby. Normally, I wouldn't have gone, but I needed the distraction. We were a couple of beers in when Ethan said something that stuck with me. "Jake, you've always been the guy who fights through the hardest situations. Don't let her take that away from you." I don't know if it was the beer or his words, but for the first time since this whole mess started, I felt a spark of determination. I realized I had a choice. I could let this break me, or I could find a way to rebuild. The next day, I decided to go back to the house. Not to talk to Sarah, but to get my stuff and figure out my next move. She wasn't home when I got there, which was a relief. But as I walked through the door, the memories hit me like a freight train. Every corner of that house held reminders of the life we'd built, or what I thought we'd built. I grabbed what I needed, some clothes, my military gear, and a few personal items. Then I saw it, our wedding photo on the mantel. I stared at it for a long time, remembering how happy we looked that day. How sure I was that we'd spend the rest of our lives together. Without thinking, I took the photo out of its frame and tore it in half. It wasn't a proud moment, but it felt cathartic. Like I was finally letting go of the illusion of what we'd been. As I was leaving, I noticed a note on the kitchen counter. It was from Sarah. "Jake, I know I messed up, but I still love you. Please don't give up on us. Sarah." I crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. I didn't know where I was going from there, but one thing was clear: I couldn't stay in the wreckage of our marriage any longer. Back again. I've got more to share, and honestly, things took a turn I didn't see coming. I mentioned in my last post that I was trying to figure out my next move after leaving Sarah. Well, life has a funny way of flipping the script when you least expect it. After packing up my stuff, I threw myself back into the one thing that had always kept me grounded: my work as a soldier. It was the only place where things made sense to me, where I knew who I was and what I was fighting for. My unit was preparing for another deployment, and though I was still reeling from the betrayal, I told my CO I wanted back in. I thought the mission would give me some clarity, maybe even some distance from the mess at home. But fate had other plans. We were sent out for a routine recon mission, nothing unusual. The kind of thing we'd done 100 times before. I was on a Black Hawk helicopter with my team, flying low over some rough terrain. It was supposed to be a straightforward operation, but then it happened. Out of nowhere, there was this deafening explosion. An RPG hit us, and the world turned upside down. The helicopter started spinning uncontrollably. I don't remember much after that, just the sound of alarms blaring, the heat of the fire, and the terrifying realization that we were going down. When I woke up, everything hurt. My vision was blurry, and my body felt like it had been crushed under a truck. I could barely move. I remember hearing voices shouting, someone saying, "We've got a live one," before I passed out again. The next time I opened my eyes, I was in a military hospital. My right arm was in a sling, my legs felt like dead weight, and my chest was wrapped in bandages. I later learned I had suffered severe burns on my back and shoulders, a spinal injury that caused partial paralysis in my left leg, and a concussion. I was lucky to be alive. Over the next few days, as I drifted in and out of consciousness, I started piecing together what had happened. Out of the crew of 8, only 3 of us had survived. One of them was my best friend in the unit, Ramirez, who I'd known since basic training. The other was the medic who'd pulled me out of the wreckage. The gravity of it hit me hard. Not only had I barely made it out alive, but I'd also lost brothers that day. I felt like I had failed them, even though I knew deep down there was nothing I could have done to change what happened. Recovery was a whole different battle. The doctors told me it would be a long road ahead, months, maybe years, of physical therapy. The burns would heal, but the paralysis might be permanent. They couldn't say for sure. At first, I was angry. Angry at the enemy for taking down our chopper. Angry at myself for surviving when some of my brothers didn't. And angry at Sarah, because even in the middle of all this chaos, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd done. But then something changed. It was my third week in the hospital when I met her, Galana Cord. She was one of the nurses assigned to my ward. She wasn't what I expected. She had this quiet strength about her, like she'd seen her fair share of life's ugliness but refused to let it break her. Her brown eyes were kind but sharp, like she could see right through my defenses. I remember the first time she spoke to me. "Jake, I know this isn't where you thought you'd end up, but you're here, and that means you've still got a fight in you," she said, checking my four. Her words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something other than anger or despair. Over the next few days, Galana became more than just a nurse to me. She was a lifeline. She didn't just do her job and leave, she listened. She asked about my life, my time in the military, even Sarah. I don't know why I opened up to her, but I did. I told her everything, from the betrayal to the crash to the guilt I felt for surviving. She didn't judge me or offer empty platitudes. She just listened, nodding quietly as I spilled my guts. "You've been through hell," she said one day, her voice soft but steady. "But you're still here, Jake. That counts for something. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" Her words stuck with me. For the first time in a long while, I started to think about the future, not the life I'd lost with Sarah, but the life I could still build. The recovery process was brutal. Physical therapy felt like torture some days, and there were moments when I wanted to give up. But every time I felt like quitting, Galana was there, pushing me, reminding me why it was worth it. I'm not saying everything magically got better overnight. I'm still dealing with the scars, both physical and emotional. But for the first time since the crash, I feel like I have a reason to keep going. Galana isn't just a nurse to me anymore. She's become a friend, a confidant, and maybe even something more. I don't know what the future holds, but I know this: I'm not done fighting. I'm back with another update. Thanks for sticking with me. It's been a journey, and writing this down helps me keep pushing forward. After the crash, I threw everything I had into recovery. Every day in physical therapy was a war of its own. My left leg wouldn't cooperate, and the burns on my back made even simple movements feel like fire. There were days I felt like I wasn't making progress, like I was just going through the motions. That's when Galana came in. She wasn't just there to check my vitals or adjust my meds. She was the one who convinced me to keep going when it felt impossible. "You survived for a reason, Jake," she told me one day after I'd hit a wall in therapy. "The pain's not the end of your story, it's just the middle." Something about the way she said it stuck. I started looking at therapy differently. Instead of focusing on what I couldn't do, I worked on what I could. Some days, that meant walking a few steps with a brace. Other days, it meant just sitting up without help. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. During those quiet moments, Galana and I talked a lot. She shared some of her own struggles, losing her father, who was also a soldier, and how it inspired her to become a nurse. Her resilience was contagious. She didn't pity me, and she didn't let me pity myself. That was what I needed, a reminder that I wasn't just my injuries or my mistakes. About a month into recovery, I got a letter from Sarah. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. She said she wanted to apologize, that she'd made a mistake, and hoped we could talk when I was ready. I tore the letter in half without finishing it. I wasn't ready to forgive her, or even face her. For now, my focus is on healing, both inside and out. And maybe, just maybe, figuring out what my future looks like. Recovery kept moving, one small step at a time, literally. I finally managed to walk across the room with a brace last week, and for the first time since the crash, I felt a little pride. It wasn't pretty, but it was progress. Galana was there, of course, cheering me on like I'd just run a marathon. "Told you," she said with a grin. "You're stronger than you think, Jake." Her belief in me kept me going. She didn't treat me like a broken soldier or a pity case. She treated me like a person, a stubborn, exhausted, but determined person. One day, she brought me a cup of terrible hospital coffee, which she doctored up with too much sugar. We sat by the window in my room, and for once, I wasn't just looking at the bleak walls or counting down the hours to my next session. "Ever think about what's next?" she asked. "Every day," I said. "But I don't have a clue what it looks like." "That's okay," she replied. "You've been through more than most people could imagine. It's not about figuring it all out at once. It's about taking the next step." She had this way of making things sound simple, even when they weren't. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like next wasn't just a void, it was something I could shape. That night, I thought a lot about her words. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew this much: I was done living in the shadow of what happened. Done letting Sarah, the crash, and the pain define me. For the first time, I could see a sliver of light through the darkness. Maybe it wasn't just survival anymore, maybe it was the start of something new. I didn't expect this to happen so soon, but Sarah showed up at the hospital. I wasn't ready for it. Galana was helping me with some stretches when Sarah walked in. For a second, I thought I was hallucinating. She looked nervous, holding a coffee like she wasn't sure what to do with it. "Jake," she said softly. "Can we talk?" Galana glanced at me, her expression unreadable. She gave my shoulder a quick squeeze and said, "I'll be back later." As soon as Galana left, the room felt heavier. Sarah stood there awkwardly until I motioned for her to sit. "I heard about the crash," she said, her voice shaking. "I wanted to come sooner, but I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me." "Why now?" I asked, not hiding the edge in my voice. She looked down at her hands, fumbling with the lid of the coffee cup. "Jake, I messed up. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to try. I still love you." Hearing her say those words didn't have the effect she probably hoped for. Instead of softening me, it lit a fire. I leaned forward, the anger bubbling to the surface. "You love me," I said, my voice rising. "You didn't seem to love me when you were sneaking around with Mark. You didn't seem to love me when I was out there risking my life." She flinched like I'd slapped her, tears spilling down her face. I know I hurt you. I've regretted it every single day." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think there was a shred of truth in her apology. But all I could see was the betrayal. "You didn't just hurt me, Sarah," I said. "You destroyed everything I thought we had. And now you want to show up here, when I'm at my lowest, and ask for another chance." She cried harder, but I didn't feel pity this time. I felt free. For the first time, I realized I didn't need her apology to move forward. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said, my voice steady. "But I do know this: you don't get to decide when I'm ready to talk. You don't get to walk back into my life like nothing happened." She nodded, wiping her tears. "I understand," she whispered. I needed to tell you I was sorry." As she got up to leave, I felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't neat or easy, but it was a step. When Galana came back, she didn't ask about Sarah. She just smiled and said, "Ready for round 2?" And for the first time that day, I smiled back. Things have been shifting for me lately, in ways I didn't expect. After Sarah's visit, something inside me felt lighter. I wasn't carrying the same weight of anger or betrayal, and for the first time, I started to think more about my future than my past. A big part of that shift was Galana. She kept showing up, not just as my nurse, but as someone who believed in me. She had this way of making me feel like I was more than the broken man I saw in the mirror. One afternoon, after a particularly rough therapy session, we were sitting by the window, sharing another cup of bad coffee. She told me about her father again, how he had been injured in the line of duty but fought every day to recover. "You remind me of him," she said, her voice soft. I laughed a little, shaking my head. "He must have been one stubborn guy." "He was," she replied, smiling. "But he didn't let his pain define him. Neither should you." That stuck with me. Later that week, I got an email from Ramirez, my best friend from the unit and one of the other crash survivors. He had been transferred to a different hospital and was dealing with his own recovery. We hadn't talked much since the crash, but he wrote to say he was proud of me for sticking with therapy and that he was fighting to do the same. "You're stronger than you think, Jake," he wrote. "Don't let this be the end of your story." It felt like a challenge, a good one. Inspired, I started pushing harder in therapy. I began setting small goals for myself, taking a few more steps, standing a little longer, trying not to let the setbacks get to me. Galana noticed the change, and one day she gave me a thumbs up as I managed to walk the length of the parallel bars without stopping. "You're getting there," she said. "One step at a time." It wasn't just about the physical progress, though. I was starting to feel alive again, like maybe there was still something out there for me, even if I didn't know what it was yet. That night, I sat in my hospital bed, staring out the window at the city lights. For the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. I wasn't planning to write again so soon, but something happened that I need to share. It feels like another big step forward, even though it came with its own kind of pain. A couple of days ago, I got a message from Sarah. She said she wanted to meet one last time to clear the air. At first, I ignored it. I wasn't sure I had anything left to say. But after thinking it over, I realized I needed to do this for me, not her. We met at a coffee shop near the hospital. She looked different, more subdued, less polished than I remembered. I don't know if it was guilt or something else, but it was clear this wasn't easy for her either. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she said as soon as we sat down. I need to tell you the truth, all of it." I nodded, letting her talk. She admitted that the affair with Mark had been more serious than she'd initially let on. It wasn't just a fling, it had been going on for months before I found out. She said she thought she loved him at the time, but now she realized she was just looking for an escape. "I know I hurt you in ways I can't take back," she said, tears in her eyes. "And I don't expect you to forgive me. But I want you to know that it wasn't your fault. You were out there being a hero, and I was the one who failed." Her words hit me hard, but not in the way I expected. For so long, I had carried the weight of her betrayal like it was something I could have prevented, like maybe if I'd been different or better, it wouldn't have happened. Hearing her own the blame lifted some of that burden. "I've already filed the divorce papers," she added quietly. "I just want you to know I'm not going to fight you on anything. You deserve to move on, Jake." For the first time, I felt something close to peace. I thanked her for being honest, but I also told her that our chapter was over. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Sarah," I said as we stood to leave. "But I can't look back anymore. I have to move forward." She nodded, wiping her tears. "You're stronger than you realize, Jake. I hope you know that." Walking away from that coffee shop, I didn't feel the anger or sadness I'd expected. Instead, I felt free. Like I was finally letting go of the past and all the pain that came with it. When I got back to the hospital, Galana noticed something was different. She didn't push me to explain, just gave me that knowing look she always has. "You're smiling," she said. "That's new." And she was right. It's been a few weeks since my last post, and I'm finally starting to feel like my life is moving in a direction I can control. After my talk with Sarah, something shifted. It was like closing the chapter freed up space in my mind for something better. Therapy is still tough, but it's becoming part of my routine instead of something I dread. I've been walking longer distances with the brace, and the therapists are even talking about trying stairs soon. Progress is slow, but every little win feels like proof that I'm still in this fight. Galana's been a big part of that. She's more than just a nurse to me now, she's a friend. Maybe more, though I haven't let myself think too far ahead. What I know for sure is that her presence makes the hard days a little easier. Last week, she brought in some books for me, stuff about resilience, overcoming challenges, and even a few action-packed novels to keep my mind off things. One of them had a note tucked inside the front cover. "Jake. The strongest people aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who get back up, over and over again. Keep going. Galana." I don't think she realizes just how much that meant to me. I also reconnected with Ramirez, my buddy from the crash. We've been talking regularly now, checking in on each other's progress. He's dealing with his own challenges, but knowing I'm not alone in this has been a huge help. We've even started joking about planning a reunion when we're both back on our feet, literally. The biggest change, though, has been in how I see myself. For so long, I let the crash, the betrayal, and the injuries define me. But now, I'm starting to see that I'm more than the things that happened to me. I'm not saying I have it all figured out, far from it. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm moving forward instead of being stuck in place. I didn't think life could feel this hopeful again. It's strange to say after everything I've been through, but lately, it feels like I'm finally getting a second chance. A few days ago, Galana asked if I wanted to join her and a group of patients for a small outdoor outing organized by the hospital. It was nothing fancy, just a picnic on the hospital grounds, but the idea of being outside, away from the fluorescent lights and constant noise, sounded like exactly what I needed. The day turned out better than I expected. The crisp air and sunlight on my face reminded me that there's a world beyond hospital walls. I sat on a blanket while Galana helped set up food for everyone, laughing and joking with some of the other patients. At one point, she sat down next to me, handing me a sandwich and grinning like we were old friends. "This is the first time I've seen you look relaxed," she said. "Guess you're rubbing off on me," I joked. Her laugh was soft but genuine, and for a moment, I forgot all the pain, the setbacks, the uncertainty. It was just nice. Later, as the sun started to set, I found myself opening up to her in a way I hadn't before. I told her about my time in the military, the camaraderie I'd had with my unit, and the sense of purpose I missed. She listened intently, nodding at all the right moments, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe it's time to find a new purpose," she said gently. Her words stayed with me long after the picnic ended. That night, as I lay in bed, I started thinking about what purpose could look like for me now. For years, my identity was tied to being a soldier. But maybe it was time to figure out who I was beyond the uniform. The next morning, I asked one of my therapists if there were any volunteer opportunities for someone in my condition. They told me about a program where veterans mentor younger patients going through similar recoveries. It's not much, but it's a start. I haven't signed up yet, but the idea of giving back, of helping someone else through their struggle, feels right. And gal Anna? She's been a constant light through all of this. I don't know where things are headed between us, but I'm okay taking it slow. For now, her friendship is more than enough. After my last post, I decided to stop thinking and just do. I signed up for the Veteran Mentorship Program. I didn't know what to expect, honestly. I wasn't even sure I'd be much help to anyone. But I figured if I could share a little of what I've learned, maybe it'd make a difference for someone else. My first mentee is a kid named Travis. He's 19, fresh out of basic training, and recovering from a knee injury that ended his career before it even started. When we met, he was quiet, barely looking at me. I could see the frustration and loss in his eyes, the same emotions I'd been wrestling with. "What's the point?" he asked me during our first session. I was supposed to do something with my life, and now it's over before it even began. I won't lie, it hit me hard because I'd felt those same thoughts after the crash. But I looked at him and said, "It's not over, Travis. It's just different now. You're still here, and that means you've got another chance to figure out who you are." He didn't say much after that, but I could tell something clicked. Over the next few meetings, he started opening up more. He talked about how much he missed being part of a team, how lost he felt without the structure and purpose the military gave him. I told him about my crash and my struggles with recovery, and how hard it was to find a sense of identity outside of being a soldier. "But you adapt," I said. "You find new ways to fight, new ways to matter." Travis smiled for the first time when I said that. It felt good, like I was doing something meaningful again. On top of that, I've been seeing more progress in my own recovery. I'm walking longer distances with less support, and my therapists have even started talking about transitioning me to outpatient care soon. Galana's been her usual supportive self, cheering me on every step of the way. She keeps me grounded, reminding me to celebrate the small wins. The other day, after a tough session, she handed me a bottle of water and said, "You're becoming unstoppable, Jake." "Thanks to you," I replied. Her cheeks flushed a little, and she gave me a playful shove. "Don't give me all the credit. You're the one doing the hard work." Maybe she's right, but I know I wouldn't have come this far without her. As for Sarah, I got the finalized divorce papers in the mail last week. It wasn't a happy moment, but it wasn't a sad one either. It just felt done. Another chapter officially closed. I'm still figuring out what's next, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm moving in the right direction. Something unexpected happened this week, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. After weeks of steady progress in therapy, my physical therapist suggested a short hike as part of my rehabilitation. A hike. A few months ago, I couldn't even stand on my own, and now they wanted me to tackle uneven ground. It felt impossible, but I said yes anyway. Galana found out about it and decided to come along, not as my nurse, but as a friend. She told me she had zero faith in my ability to pack a decent lunch, so she showed up with sandwiches and a thermos of coffee. We drove out to a trail about an hour away, and I'll admit, seeing those hills made me nervous. My brace felt heavy, and my legs still didn't cooperate half the time. But Galana just smiled and said, "One step at a time, Jake. That's all it takes." The hike wasn't long, maybe half a mile, but it felt like climbing Everest. Every step was a battle, and there were moments when I thought about turning back. But Galana stuck with me, encouraging me with every shaky step. At one point, we stopped at a clearing with an incredible view of the valley below. The air was crisp, the sky was this endless blue, and for the first time in months I felt alive. "You made it," Galana said, her voice full of pride. "Barely," I joked, leaning on a walking stick. But she shook her head. No, Jake. You didn't just make it, you crushed it. Don't sell yourself short. Her words stayed with me as we made our way back. By the time we reached the car, I was exhausted, but it was the best kind of tired, the kind that comes from doing something you didn't think you could. On the drive home, we didn't talk much. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that happens when you're just content. When she dropped me off, Galana handed me a note. For later, she said with a smile before driving away. That night, I opened it. It was simple, just a few words. Jake. The hardest part is behind you. The best is yet to come. G. I don't know where things are heading with her, but for now, I'm just grateful for her friendship, and for the reminder that there's still so much life to live. This week, something happened that I didn't see coming. It's hard to explain, but it felt like a shift, like a small part of me woke up again. I was sitting in the hospital's common room, reading a book Galana had lent me, when she walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She plopped down beside me, giving me her usual warm smile. Busy saving the world, she teased, glancing at the book. Just trying to survive the plot twists, I joked back. We fell into our usual rhythm of easy conversation. But this time, something felt different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it until she said, Jake, do you ever think about what comes after all this? I looked at her, trying to figure out what she meant. After the hospital? She nodded. Yeah. After recovery. After you leave here. It was the first time someone had asked me that in a way that didn't feel clinical. And honestly, I didn't have an answer. I guess I haven't thought that far ahead, I admitted. For a while, it was just about making it through the next day. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. That's fair. But you're stronger now, Jake. You've made it through the hardest parts. Maybe it's time to start thinking about what you want, not just what you're recovering from. Her words stayed with me long after she left. Later that night, I found myself making a list, not of goals or milestones, but of things I wanted to feel again. Peace, joy, trust. Trust. That one hit me harder than the rest. After Sarah, I'd built walls so high I didn't think anyone could get through. But Galana? She's been slowly chipping away at them without even trying. She makes me laugh. She listens without judgment. She believes in me when I forget how to believe in myself. The idea of trusting someone again scares me. But maybe it's time to try. I don't know what's ahead for me, or for us, but I do know this. I'm tired of living in fear of being hurt again. I want to take the risk. This past week has been a whirlwind, and I feel like I'm standing on the edge of something big, something I haven't felt in a long time. If you've been following my story, you know trust hasn't come easy for me since everything fell apart. But this week, I decided to take a leap I didn't think I'd have the courage to make. It all started after that conversation with Galana about what's next. Her words about finding purpose and thinking beyond the hospital kept replaying in my head. She's been this steady presence in my life, always there to encourage me, to push me when I felt like giving up, to remind me that there's more to me than my injuries and my past. And lately, I've realized how much I look forward to seeing her, not just as my nurse, but as someone who's become a huge part of my life. For weeks, I'd been second-guessing everything I felt. Was it just gratitude? Was I misreading things because she's kind and supportive? Or was there something real between us? I couldn't tell if it was my fear talking or if I was genuinely afraid of messing up something good by taking it too far. Then something happened that changed everything. Last weekend, Galana dropped by after her shift with soup from a local spot she swears by. She does little things like that all the time, bringing books, sneaking in decent coffee when I'm tired of the hospital sludge, even cracking jokes when she knows I've had a rough day. But this time felt different. We talked while I ate, as we always do. She told me about a hiking trip she'd taken with her family years ago, how her dad had carried her on his shoulders for most of the trail because she was too young to keep up. Her face lit up as she talked, and for a moment, I forgot all about my pain, my recovery, everything, because I couldn't take my eyes off her. At one point, she stopped mid-sentence, catching me staring. "What?" she asked, smiling but a little shy. I shook my head, trying to play it off. "Nothing. Just, you're easy to talk to, that's all." She gave me this look, soft, knowing, like she could see through every wall I'd built around myself. "You're not so bad yourself, Jake," she said. The way she said it, so casual but sincere, left me feeling something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time: hope. After she left, I sat in my room, replaying the conversation in my mind. I kept asking myself why I was holding back. Was it because of Sarah? Because I was afraid of being hurt again? Or was I just scared of what it would mean to let someone in? The truth hit me hard. I wasn't just afraid of being hurt, I was afraid of being vulnerable. After everything I'd been through, it felt safer to keep my distance, to protect myself from the possibility of another heartbreak. But in doing that, I was also keeping myself from something real, something good. The next day, I decided to stop running from it. When Galana came by during her shift, I asked if she'd like to grab coffee after work. For a second, she looked surprised, maybe even a little hesitant, but then her face softened, and she smiled. "I'd like that," she said. We met at a small cafe a few blocks from the hospital, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and art on the walls that didn't make sense but felt welcoming anyway. I got there early, nervous as hell, second-guessing whether this was a mistake. But when she walked in, all of that melted away. She was out of her scrubs for once, wearing jeans and a simple sweater, and it struck me how different she looked, still Galana but more. She waved and sat down across from me, her smile easy and warm. "So," she said, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion," I said, trying to sound casual. "I just thought it'd be nice to hang out somewhere that doesn't smell like antiseptic." She laughed, and just like that, the nerves were gone. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. She told me about growing up in a military family, how she wanted to be a journalist before deciding to go into nursing. I told her about my unit, the camaraderie I missed, and the guilt I carried from the crash. At one point, she reached across the table and touched my hand. "Jake," she said, her voice soft. "You've been through hell, but you're still here. That says something about you." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. When the cafe closed, we stepped outside into the cool night air. I walked her to her car, my heart pounding with every step. When we reached her door, I took a deep breath. "Galana," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I don't know what's next for me, or what my future looks like. But I know this, I don't want to face it alone. And if there's even a chance you feel the same way, I'm willing to take the risk." She stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then slowly, she smiled. "Jake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been waiting for you to say that." Before I could say anything else, she leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't rushed or awkward, it was gentle, warm, and filled with all the things we hadn't said. When we pulled back, she rested her forehead against mine and whispered, "We'll figure it out. One step at a time." Here I am again, sitting down to write another update, and honestly, I can't believe how much has changed since my last post. If you've been following my story, you know it's been a long, uphill battle, physically, emotionally, and mentally. But for the first time, it feels like I'm standing at the start of something new, something that actually feels like living. After that night with Galana, I couldn't stop thinking about her. The way she kissed me, the way she said, "One step at a time," like she believed we could make this work even though everything about my life right now feels messy and uncertain. I spent the next few days in this strange mix of excitement and fear. Could I really do this? Could I really open myself up to someone again? Galana must have sensed my hesitation because she didn't push. She came by during her shifts, just like always, her presence as steady and comforting as ever. She didn't bring up the kiss or what we'd said that night, and honestly, I was grateful. It gave me the space to figure out what I wanted, what we might look like. A few days later, I made my decision. "Hey," I said as she came into my room during one of her shifts. "You busy after work?" She raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Why? Got another coffee shop in mind?" "Not exactly," I replied, trying not to let my nerves show. "I was thinking we could go for a walk. There's a park nearby I've been wanting to check out." She smiled, and for a moment, I forgot why I'd been so scared to ask. "I'd like that," she said. The park wasn't anything fancy, just a small trail winding through a patch of trees, with a couple of benches scattered along the way. It took some effort to get there, my brace slowing me down, but Galana didn't seem to mind. She matched her pace to mine, her hand brushing against my arm every now and then. We found a bench near a pond and sat there for a while, watching the ducks and the ripples on the water. For the first few minutes, neither of us said much. It was one of those rare moments where silence felt comfortable, like we didn't need words to fill the space between us. Finally, she broke the silence. You seem lighter, she said, glancing at me. Like you're starting to let go of everything that's been weighing you down. I thought about that for a moment. She wasn't wrong. For months, I'd been carrying the weight of the crash, the betrayal, the uncertainty about my future. But lately, it felt like that weight was shifting, like I was finally strong enough to start setting it down. Maybe I am, I said. But I think that's because of you. She looked at me, her expression soft but serious. Jake, you're the one doing the work. I'm just here to remind you how strong you are. I smiled, shaking my head. You always say that, but you don't give yourself enough credit. You've been my anchor, Galana. I don't know where I'd be without you. Her cheeks flushed, and she looked away, but I could see the smile tugging at her lips. We stayed at the park until the sun started to set, the sky turning shades of pink and orange. On the walk back to the car, I stopped for a moment, leaning on my walking stick as I turned to face her. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, I began, my voice steady despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. About finding a purpose, about what comes next. And I don't have all the answers yet, but I know one thing for sure, I want you to be part of it. Her eyes widened, and for a second, I worried I'd said too much. But then she smiled, that warm, reassuring smile that's got me through so many hard days. I'd like that, Jake, she said softly. After that night, things between us started to change. Not in a sudden dramatic way, but in small meaningful moments. We'd grab coffee after her shifts or sit together during my therapy sessions, talking about everything from our favorite books to our dreams for the future. One evening, as we were sitting in the hospital's courtyard, she asked me a question that stopped me in my tracks. What would you do if you weren't afraid? I stared at her, unsure how to answer. Afraid of what? I asked. Afraid of failing, she replied. Afraid of getting hurt. Afraid of starting over. Her words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. I thought about everything I'd been through, the crash, the betrayal, the long road to recovery, and realized she was right. Fear had been holding me back, keeping me from taking the risks I needed to take to move forward. I'd live, I said finally. I'd stop waiting for life to happen and just live. She nodded, her gaze steady. Then maybe it's time to start. That night, I went back to my room and made a list. Not a to-do list, but a list of all the things I wanted to do, the places I wanted to see, the goals I wanted to achieve, the risks I wanted to take. It wasn't a long list, but it felt like a start. At the top of that list was Galana.